Dealing with intense Viking raids? Building an unholy amount of ballistas? And appeasing my new neighbors? Let's see how this goes. Today I played 100 Years of Kingdoms and Castles, Survival Mode. The contingent of ships sent out by the King of Vortia himself were sailing through new tides possessing the updated Vortide family banner. That was when a nasty storm had taken out all 3 ships, causing the only survivors to swim to a nearby island. There were only 5 of them, and they had wasted no time at all. The second that they stood foot upon the lands, they had started to construct a new keep. That way they could base all of our operations out of it. After re-establishing communication with the King of Vortia through Messenger Pigeon, I once again can start the development of our new kingdom. We knew nothing about these lands, so it was vital that a small little village got set up before we did anything else. I saw that there were 5 total islands in this little island chain. Now this could either be a really good thing or a really bad thing. Nevertheless, I ordered the harvesting of a bunch of nearby trees. We needed to get a home built for these 5 loyal citizens. It also made sense to construct a few extra homes in the scenario that we would be getting more people to join this newly founded village. Once the very first house was fully constructed, I could tell that all of the 5 villagers felt relieved and a lot more comfortable about being on this new island. Since housing was no longer an issue, it now made sense to build some farms. An apple tree farm made the most sense as it was able to produce a lot more than having a few wheat fields. So in addition to putting down an apple farm, I put down 1 wheat field. Once these farms actually get up and running, it honestly seemed like this new location wasn't going to be bad after all. I really didn't want to jump the gun though and start saying that this whole thing was going to be easy, just because I didn't know if there were going to be any threats that we would run into on this new island chain. In preparations, I started to build a stone quarry. This way, we would be able to get up some defenses in the scenario that we did run into any enemies. For all we know, King Banta or Queen Mazenberger might even be residing in these islands. As I finally had enough stone, I built our very first well. That way, in the case that something catches on fire, we don't have to run all the way over to the ocean just to grab water and put it out. Wow, our population really is growing. However, that means we need a lot more food. So I placed down another apple farm, as like I said, these farms produce a lot more than wheat fields. Since the village was getting a little bit bigger, I had placed down a forester. This way, I wouldn't have to manage exactly which trees needed to be chopped down and replanted where. It seemed like all basic aspects of our village were being handled. The only thing that wasn't was defense. So it was now time to place some wooden walls. Obviously, we ideally would move to stone later on, but we have more wood than we have stone currently, so it just made sense to use wood for most of the walls. Ideally, I wanted my village to be enclosed fairly quickly, so I didn't leave a lot of room to expand. If anything, we could start building some structures outside of the walls once they finish. As I awaited things to be constructed in the village, I had consulted all 3 advisors. 2 of them had given me very good advice, while the military one had said nothing. This was a little bit strange because they always seemed to have an opinion, except for now. Maybe it was because we didn't encounter any threats, and they thought that things were going to be completely peaceful on these new islands. I don't know if that's the case, but we'll find out. Despite not receiving any information on military tactics, I myself wanted to make sure that the keep had all of the walls in its field of view. That way, the few archers that were residing in the keep could take out any enemies that were destroying the walls. I really didn't like how all of the farms weren't fully covered by the range of the keep. So I placed down a little landmarker where I was going to place an archer tower. This way, the farms would have full protection by at least 1 tower. As things were panning out, it had been brought to my attention that this little settlement we created was now recognized as a small village. Now that's pretty exciting. We already made it this far in the span of 8 years. Having all wood walls is never a good idea because they can catch on fire. So I started placing down some stone walls in between the wooden ones to prevent any fires from spreading super far. Right when I thought we were invincible and nothing could go wrong, a dragon was sighted. This would be our very first time encountering a dragon in these lands. The only thing is, this time we don't have a bunch of ballistas to take them out. Let's see how this goes. With tensions being high, someone had mistakenly started a fire in the village. One of the cottages was completely ablaze. Thankfully, that well was there from earlier that we had constructed because it was used to put out the fire as quickly as possible. This can't be good. Things are already on fire and the dragon hasn't even arrived yet. Real quick, go ahead and hit that subscribe button for more content. Oh no, I spoke too soon. A giant red and orange dragon had made its way over our small village. Luckily, it wasn't shooting fire at us, but we were shooting arrows at it. I'm assuming we were too small for it to actually want to do any damage to us, so it just flew away. This encounter made me realize that we need ballistas, and we need them fast. Now that a slight economy started to get in development, I was able to improve our roadways, upgrading some of the most traveled areas to stone paths. This would give everyone a little boost when traveling over these roads. I'm gonna have to close off these walls. Let's move this forester a little bit down. Honestly, it was really good that I did that, because I had gotten word that a Viking invasion was commencing. Oh no, this can't be good. We had just gotten our settlement established. How do they even know that we're here? Well, regardless, it's time to prepare. I quickly tried placing down some last-minute walls to block off the area that the Vikings were coming from. It looked like there were only 2 units that had landed on my island, so this shouldn't be too terrible. It seemed like the Vikings really weren't that interested in destroying my base. They were just trying to steal my gold. They had a pretty good game plan too. One unit went and stole my 13 gold from my treasury, while the other one was trying to distract me by destroying one of my stone walls. This strategy ended up working out for them, but not without heavy casualties. Well, now I know I need to encircle the village with walls as soon as possible. The Vikings were only able to steal 13 gold. That really wasn't enough to make or break the kingdom. So yes, it was annoying that they stole it, but we were still able to survive without it. We even had made 12 gold back by the next year. I was starting to run out of space in what was planned to be the residential area. So I knew that I needed to start producing charcoal, so that way I would be able to have nicer houses for the villagers, and we could also fit a lot more people in those nicer houses. So I placed down a charcoal maker. Awesome, we're pretty much all walled off. Of course, right when we have success, something bad has to happen. One of the cottages in our village caught on fire. But once again, that well came in clutch. I really wanted to maximize the output of stone that we were getting, so I placed down another stone quarry. We needed to have as much of it as we could get. I then also placed down a cemetery. If we were going to be dealing with Vikings and dragons, we were definitely going to need one of these. I didn't just want my people to lay wherever, so they needed a proper burial in the scenario that something bad happened. As I was distracted by placing down another charcoal maker and a stockpile, the second Viking invasion had launched. I had noticed that only one Viking unit had landed on my island. Some of them were going to other islands, which was a little bit weird. Does that mean that we're not alone on this island chain? Well, regardless, the Vikings started to set some of my walls on fire. My strategically placed keep had taken out the one Viking unit that actually landed on the island. This was not a bad invasion at all. We survived it pretty easily, and we took no losses. Besides maybe the wall catching on fire, but that's not a big deal. I started to reevaluate where I wanted to put my very first archer tower. I had now selected a slightly more strategic spot that covered all of the agricultural area, while it also was being covered by the keep. So if Vikings got in and started to attack the tower, the keep would then be able to do some damage to those Vikings. Speaking of Vikings, yet another Viking invasion was occurring. It was really hard to tell if this was just a completely separate invasion, or if it was just the Vikings that were attacking the other islands. It really didn't matter. All that did matter, though, was that there were Vikings heading towards our village. I didn't know if they were going to try and set some more walls on fire, or if this time they were going to attack my gate. It seemed like they were heading directly towards the gate, which was a good thing because that meant that they were going to be in range of my keep. Luckily enough, we took out the first unit with ease. After taking out that unit, a bunch of captives had joined our kingdom. They said they were kidnapped from a nearby island when their village was invaded by the Vikings. They now were going to reside here full time. I needed to place down some more houses, or at least upgrade them so we could house them because we had more people than we had beds. I had also placed down a new archer tower right in the position that we were planning. This small village really is looking a lot more secure now. Check out the Vortide merch store and earn yourself a 15% off coupon right now. Link down below. Hopefully, it's gonna be secure enough for this next dragon invasion. I had got word that another dragon was spotted in the skies. I wanted to check to see if I could build a ballista because I know ballistas are good at taking down dragons. Unfortunately, I couldn't because we needed a chamber of war. So that became our priority as I wanted to get ballistas as soon as we could. Luckily enough, the dragon didn't even make its way over to our island. It had completely avoided us and flew away. That wasn't something to complain about, but I was just pretty shocked because we definitely were growing and I would assume that a dragon would want to come here and get some free lunch. While placing down a mason so he could repair structures inside of the kingdom, I had gotten word that another Viking invasion was even occurring. We had just gotten attacked by a dragon almost, and now there were more Vikings? It seemed like the Vikings were coming at an increased rate than what we were used to back in the lands of Vortia. It honestly seemed like the invasions were a lot more intense in these lands. That must mean that we were a lot closer to the Viking capital. Thankfully, I had gotten a ballista up, so we could now take out the Vikings with not only arrows, but also big ballista shots. It seemed like they were going straight for my walls, which that's pretty much all they could do. Uh-oh, they destroyed one of the walls. Weirdly enough, once one of the walls was fully destroyed, the Vikings targeted even more walls. Now that's just strange. The only thing that I could think of is that they were trying to destroy as many walls as they could in preparations for the more Vikings that were yet to come. Right after we had taken out all of the Vikings, a ship sailing with a blue banner that had diplomats on it made its way over to my village. This was incredibly exciting as I was now able to figure out who one of my neighbors were. When I talked to the diplomats, I had found out that their name was King Genasi. I had talked to them and ended up being very friendly with them as they reminded me of one of my old close friends. They also were pretty friendly back. We exchanged our kind words and then their diplomat had left. He had mentioned that they would be back pretty soon. This was exciting because this could be the start of a very good relationship. I had also placed down my very first manor, as it was now time to expand as quickly as we could. It seemed like this other kingdom might have been a lot more advanced than we were, assuming that they've been on these islands for quite a while. They already had ships and everything, and we don't even have a single ship built. Our charcoal industry was really lacking, so I ended up placing down a large charcoal maker. I had also placed down a tavern because I wanted to keep all of my citizens as happy as they could be. After rearranging what jobs are the most important in the kingdom, I ended up placing down a forester as well. We really were going to be burning through a lot of wood with our new and improved charcoal industry, so I needed to make sure that we were chopping down enough trees to sustain it. Of course, a Viking invasion and a dragon invasion had happened at the same time. Both types of enemies were spotted by some of my troops in the watchtowers. King Genasi had also sent over a diplomat right before the invasion began. I kinda wanted to deal with the Vikings first before talking to him, so that's exactly what I did. As the enemy Vikings had marched towards my castle, I was concerned that they were going to go for the one wooden wall that they were running past. Thankfully they didn't. My keep was able to pelt all of the enemies with arrows, so much that they had been taken out before they even made it to the wall that they wanted to attack. Alright, let's see what King Genazi wants. I was hoping to improve our relationship even further, but unfortunately that wasn't the case. He was asking me for help with the Vikings, and he wanted me to send over troops that I didn't have. I wanted to see where King Genazi was stationed at, so I watched one of his boats sail back to an island that was diagonal from mine. It had also looked like some more Vikings were heading over to my island now. This was a little bit weird because they were just sailing from King Genazi's island. Maybe they stole all the gold that he had and they were coming for mine now. This attack seemed like a repeat of the one that had just happened. The enemy Vikings started to make their way over to the other side of my island, but this time they were able to take out my forester. Well, that's incredibly annoying. They're not really getting anywhere by doing this, but it definitely is annoying. I also had noticed that after killing the Vikings, I had some more captives that had joined my kingdom. These poor people were taken from their homes, but now they found a new one. With all this concern from the recent Viking invasions, I had placed down a church to make people feel a little bit more comfortable. I had also thrown down another ballista tower in the center of the village. I was definitely running out of land as I was condensing everything pretty well. So I decided to expand further into the agricultural area so we could support more people living in our village. Of course, I placed down another apple farm. Vikings! Another Viking invasion was happening. Unfortunately, my walls weren't reconstructed. So the enemies were able to get in and steal some gold, but I was able to take out the 2 units who made it inside of my castle. The last unit ended up not even being a threat as we took them out as they ran across the walls of my castle. I had then talked to King Genazi. He had mentioned that they had a sick person with them and he needed to be treated as soon as possible. If he didn't, he would die. So I told him that we would be able to keep him here and take care of him. But unfortunately, this resulted in a plague happening. The only good outcome of that is my relationship with King Genazi increased. But at what cost? A lot of people were taken out by this vicious plague. It also seemed like in this time of need, we were running out of food. With all of these people joining the village, we were running out of food fast, and people were also eating extra food since there was a plague going around. Since we were working with such little space, I had also started to plan out in my head where everything was going to go. I started constructing a Noria at the bottom of the agricultural area. That way, we would be able to get some more fertile land. That meant that I could also place down farms in areas that we weren't able to earlier. We definitely will have enough apples now. Right next to the Noria, I placed down a small water reserve. This allows all of the water that's being collected by the Noria to be dispersed amongst the farms. This was very necessary, but the only issue with it was that I needed to have workers working it. So I told my archer towers and ballistas to not be active while we weren't getting invaded. When we do get invaded by the Vikings, I'll go ahead and re-enable those towers. King Genazi had sent over another diplomat. I was very curious what he wanted. He was telling me what happened in the last Viking invasion and how he fought them off with a bunch of archer towers. I graciously accepted his advice and our relationship improved. His diplomat looked like they were returning back to their village, and then things were pretty peaceful. That wasn't until the Vikings had arrived. Another Viking invasion was occurring. This time we had intel that there were only 5 units total. It appeared that the first Viking unit we were encountering was one of the looter kinds. This is the same unit that had stolen 13 gold from us earlier on. Unfortunately, I had a little gap in my walls, so they were able to just run straight through the crack of the walls and get to my treasury. Thankfully, we stopped them and killed that unit before they even got out. I had also realized that I needed to plug this gap in my wall. The food issue that we were having also wasn't resolved with these extra farms, so I placed down another apple tree farm. Hopefully this should do it. As usual, the rest of the Viking units had made their way over to my island. I always think that the assault is over, but it's not. It makes it a little bit easier though that the Vikings are attacking almost in waves rather than attacking all at once. Wow, look at our nice little village. So peaceful. Almost too peaceful. You know what that means? It's time to expand. I started to destroy a tavern and a couple hovels in order to replace them with the bigger and better manor. If you have 4 hovels on a tile versus having 1 manor, you get 20 beds versus 25. Obviously, we're going to take the manor and get the extra beds, as we're only using 4 tiles. The only downfall about that trade is I had to move my tavern to a different area. In addition to all this new construction, I placed down a new archer tower. I made this one a lot closer to the wall, as I needed to cover the new territory that we had expanded to. Oh boy, just in time for a dragon attack. Surprisingly enough, my villagers didn't even get to see the dragon. Now that's really not something to complain about. However, they did have to deal with more Vikings. In addition to those little Vikings, a giant bloodthirsty ogre started pounding away at one of our front gates. The gate came tumbling down, and the ogre almost marched its way into our little village. Thankfully enough, we had taken him out the second that he had destroyed the gate. Look at these little stragglers. They're a little bit late to the invasion. After seeing how easily one single ogre had taken down our front gate, I knew that it was time to expand our walls, as well as our population. It needed to keep growing if we were going to survive these intense Viking raids that are yet to come. Things still felt pretty cramped inside of the village, so it was time to expand even a little bit more, just to level out where the house area should be. As I was placing down some farms outside of our walls, another Viking invasion began. I could have swore we just had one a couple years ago. Thankfully, there weren't too many enemies, and we took them out in a matter of seconds. Oh, wait, I spoke way too soon. There ended up being 4 giant ogres, some looters, and then a Viking unit who had made their way into my castle. They destroyed one of the walls, and then started to steal as much loot as they could. Strangely enough, 2 of the giant ogres that were destroying my wall had decided not to do it anymore. I don't know why, but I'm not going to complain. It looked like they were heading back to their ship. Maybe they had more important matters. Get out of here, you pesky rats. After dealing with all of those Vikings, King Genasi had come over and wanted to talk. He told me that he'd be interested in trading with me, but we don't have any docks, so it would be impossible. Well, now I know what's being added to the to-do list. Not only would building a dock open up our city to trade, but it could also potentially improve our relationship with King Genasi. That would be very beneficial, especially with all these Vikings and dragons. My ballista towers stood tall and sturdy over my whole village. We definitely need to get more. In addition to that, I also planned on training some archers soon. I just needed to find a place to put down the archery range. Since the ballistas were so effective at taking out dragons and ogres, I knew I was going to need a lot of them. There we go. The height of the towers definitely affected the ballista's range by a lot. In addition to the new ballistas, I wanted to place down some archer towers too. And it's a good thing that I did. Vikings were already on the island. This time, it looked like the archer towers were really going to be doing a lot of work. There was only one giant ogre, and the rest were all small Viking units. It seemed like the Vikings weren't interested in all attacking from the same side. This honestly made things so much easier. The reason being is that I had a bunch of towers scattered throughout the village. If I only had 2 towers being able to focus on all of the enemies at once, they surely wouldn't be taken out as quickly. Since I had a whole bunch of towers focusing on all of the enemies, it went by very smoothly. It was time to fully commit to the expansion of the town. Geez, that really opens things up quite a bit. I have a lot more space now, and I can fit those houses that I wanted to build. More population means that traffic is going to get even worse in the town. So I started upgrading most of the roadways to stone. King Genasi had also popped in to try and annoy me about the dock. But it honestly worked, because right after he had talked to me about it, I decided it was time to build one. Once again, it made sense to do because we would both benefit from trading. I also expanded my operations out to an iron mine. We didn't have any iron at all, and I wanted to start creating armaments so we could train those archers. It seemed like I was never going to get a break at this point. A red giant dragon was making its way towards our village. Fires were already spreading before the dragon even attacked. And when it did, there was even more fire. Luckily enough, the dragon only attacked the farms that were outside of the walls. This really wasn't that bad because the fire wouldn't spread to the inside of our castle. Thankfully enough, the trade ship didn't get scared away by the dragon. So I was able to trade for some supplies, including iron and some armaments. This would be very useful. A pretty large swarm of Vikings was making their way towards the village. Sure enough, there was a direct opening to the city, but the enemies weren't able to capitalize on it. We took out the enemies with ease and didn't really have to worry about them doing anything. There was even this one looter unit that tried to make a full send for it when it was the last alive. That just didn't make any sense, buddy. Annoyingly enough, I then had to rebuild the dock. I also had started to build a merchant ship so that way we could send our own ships over to King Genazi and start trading our goods. The people had spoken. A tavern was requested to be built as happiness levels were dropping. Of course, I decided to build the tavern, and then I directed our trade ship to head over to King Genazi's castle. And soon enough, another Viking invasion happened. But this one was different. 2 enemy ogres had broken through our wall. And that was when 4 different looter units had made their way into my castle and stole all of the gold out of the treasury. They had escaped with every single gold piece. This invasion was arguably the worst one. I don't think the Vikings had had so much success in any other. We really needed to step our defenses up. And I think I had an idea. But of course, before I was even able to do anything, some dragons started to attack my castle. One of them went straight for my ballistas and actually dealt a lot of damage to them. That's pretty smart, honestly. Once the dragon got super low on health, it started to fly over the ocean. And of course, it died over the ocean, so we weren't even able to harvest it after we killed it. We didn't get a prize from it. And of course, another giant red dragon had made its way over and basically crop dusted us. It set all of the crops on fire and then flew away. Now that's just not cool. Right after King Genazi had seen that embarrassing display, for some reason he wanted us to send over troops to him. Unfortunately, I still didn't have any, so we really couldn't help out. I needed to make sure that our castle was in tip-top shape before I even considered sending over troops to help King Genazi. Speaking of helping ourselves, more Vikings had moved in to assault. It honestly seemed like they were relentless. These waves were never going to end, and we were never going to get a break at all. There were quite a lot of Viking ships, and actually quite a few of them decided to stop on our island. We were looking at around 2 giant ogres and a whole bunch of enemy Vikings, including some catapults. Thankfully enough, we had quite a lot of ballistas. So they started pelting the giant ogres and dealing a lot of good damage. The first giant ogre had been dealt with pretty quickly. The second one was about half health the second that it got close to our castle walls. And that was when it was taken out completely as the ballistas did their job. The catapults, on the other hand, were pelting one of my archer towers. Once again, the ballistas came in clutch and took it out from a decently far range. It seemed like the regular Vikings were quite useless without the giant ogres to back them up. As long as there wasn't a hole in the castle walls, they really couldn't do anything to us. This was pretty satisfying as they had only attacked my farms, which didn't really matter. It wasn't anything that was inside of the castle walls, so I really wasn't that concerned. Since it seemed like we were going to get a very small break, I placed down another tavern, talked to King Genazi as he asked me to send some stone over on the merchant ships, and re-fortified my castle walls. The ballistas were so effective at taking out the enemy Vikings and dragons that I ended up placing down another one. It really wasn't ideal that they were all concentrated at the middle of our little town. But at the same time, it provided the best range for the towers to do the maximum amount of damage from the maximum amount of distance. Well, time to test out if that's actually true. Let's see if these ballistas are really as good as I'm thinking. Another Viking invasion was going down. And this time, there was even more than the last. Wow, that is a lot of Vikings. There was only one giant ogre that was a part of this assault though. That made me feel a little bit better. Sure, we were still surrounded by a whole bunch of Vikings on one side of the castle, but without the giant ogre supporting them, they wouldn't be able to breach the walls. So we took out all of the enemies without sustaining any real damage. King Genasi had sent over his diplomats to come and talk to me. He was asking if we would be able to send troops once again over to his castle to help him fight off the next Viking invasion. I still didn't have troops. I don't know if it was by coincidence or what, but King Genasi's trade ship had actually stopped trading at my port once I told him that we wouldn't be able to help. Hopefully he's not going to hold that against me. It also made sense to place down a horse cart so that way I could transport some supplies to the dock and they could be brought over to King Genasi's port. Well, it's time for another ballista tower. I erected a ballista tower in a matter of seconds. The amount of stone and materials that went into building it was quite pricey, but it was definitely worth it, as the whole keep was almost surrounded by tall towers that had ballistas on top of them. Surely, if I had surrounded the whole keep with these ballista towers, it might not ever get destroyed. This could be pretty overpowered. More Vikings? Is this ever gonna stop? At least this time, I had a lot more ballista towers now, and a bunch of wooden decoy walls. Since we had an unlimited amount of wood, I would be able to build a whole bunch of wooden walls and use them almost as a decoy. This whole strategy was to make all of the enemies attack my decoy walls instead of attacking my actual castle walls. While they're distracted by them, I would be able to take out the enemies without them knowing they're not even doing any real damage. This strategy seemed to work, as the enemy catapults were targeting the wooden walls like crazy. Same with the giant ogres, and they had been taken out before they even made it over to my stone walls. While I was trying to set up the horse cart's route, a dragon had snuck up on our village. Weirdly enough, it had turned around immediately once I'd realized that it was trying to attack us. It must have been those ballista towers. I really needed to find a new way to keep the citizens a lot more happy. So I placed down 2 swineherds and then a butcher, so that way we could get some pork. This would surely increase their happiness. King Genasi had also reached out to me, and he was talking to me telling me that his people were super fearful right now. They were scared of all of the dragons and Vikings that kept invading. I gave him some advice that using ballistas against the dragons would take them out super quickly. He seemed pretty appreciative of this and then headed back to his island. I ended up placing down a great hall so that way I could host feasts, increasing happiness around my village. This would only be temporary, but it would be better than nothing, especially if the happiness had fallen pretty low. Well, here goes nothing. More Vikings. I had gotten intel that there were over 40 different Viking units that were attacking our island chains. Hopefully King Genasi was ready for this. My ballistas immediately got to work, taking out the enemy catapults as soon as they got into range. The rest of the Vikings would be taken out by the archer towers, as this made the most sense. Some enemy ogres had approached on the other side of the island. Once again, my ballistas were way too overpowered and melted them like they were butter. Once all of the special units were taken care of, a lot of the enemies decided it was time to retreat. They had no hope. There was one Viking unit, however, that wanted to sacrifice themselves and just ran directly at my castle. Whew, I'm super relieved that we survived that raid. I then started placing down a new entrance on one of the sides of the castle that didn't have too much accessibility. I planned on expanding a little bit on that side of the castle once the time was right, and this was kind of preparing for it. I had also started making some trades with one of the merchant ships that had arrived at my dock. I purchased more armaments as I was finally planning on building some archer units. I also wanted to increase our population so that way we could collect even more gold. The economy was looking pretty sturdy, but if I was going to build more towers and start training some troops, then I'm really going to have to make sure that our economy is very solid. It seemed like the Viking invasions and dragon attacks were only going to get a lot more intense from here. I knew that we were really going to have to step things up and even maybe make some allies if we wanted to survive another 100 years.